There is a kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix. Not the exhaustion that comes from working too many hours or staying up too late. This is something deeper, something that lives in the bones. It's the exhaustion that arrives after you've spent 2 hours at a party, surrounded by laughing people, and somehow, inexplicably, you walk out feeling more alone than when you walked in. And the worst part? You can't explain it to anyone, because from the outside, everything looked fine. You smiled, you nodded, you held a drink in your hand and made all the right sounds at all the right moments. But inside, something was quietly shutting down. If you've ever felt that, if crowds don't energize you but instead leave you hollow, if loud rooms make something in your chest tighten before you've even walked through the door, then I want you to stay with me tonight. Because what I'm about to tell you is not what the world has been telling you your whole life. The world has been calling this a flaw, a shyness, a social anxiety, a quirk to fix, a bug to patch, a weakness to overcome with enough exposure therapy and positive thinking. But what if it isn't any of those things? What if the very thing that makes crowded spaces feel unbearable to you is actually evidence of something profound happening inside you, something that most people will live their entire lives never understanding about themselves? This isn't a video about how to tolerate parties better. This is a video about understanding why your nervous system responds the way it does, and why that response might be one of the most important things you'll ever learn about yourself. Let's begin somewhere most people never think to look. Let's begin at the beginning. Think back, not to last weekend, not to the last social event that drained you, but further. Think back to when you were a child, before you had language for what you were feeling, before you knew the word overstimulated or introvert or sensitive. There was just the feeling. Maybe it was the birthday party where everyone was screaming and laughing, and you found yourself sitting in a corner, not because you were sad, but because the noise felt like it was pressing on the inside of your skull. Maybe it was school hallways during passing period, that wall of sound and movement that made you want to disappear into the nearest bathroom and just breathe. And what happened when the adults in your life noticed? Most likely one of two things. Either they called you shy, said it with a slight frown, the way you describe a fruit that isn't quite ripe yet, or they pushed. Go play with the other kids, stop being so quiet, why are you always hiding? And somewhere in those moments, a belief began to form. Not loudly, not all at once, but slowly, the way water shapes stone, through repetition, through small moments that accumulate into a narrative. The belief that something was wrong with you.
That belief is what psychologists call a core wound, and it is devastatingly common among people who feel the way you do. The wound isn't dramatic. It didn't require abuse or crisis. It only required a world that consistently communicated in 1,000 tiny ways that your natural way of experiencing life was incorrect, that your nervous system's honest response to overwhelming input was a problem to be managed rather than a signal to be respected. And here is where the psychology gets truly fascinating. Your brain, the one you've been walking around with your entire life, the one that finds crowded places exhausting, the one that needs silence the way other people need conversation, your brain is not broken. It is, in the most literal neurological sense, more active than average. There's a concept in neuroscience called sensory processing sensitivity, first identified by psychologist Dr. Elaine Aron in the 1990s. And what her research revealed shook the psychological community in the quietest way possible, because it validated something that approximately 1 in 5 people on this planet have been told their whole lives to suppress. Sensory processing sensitivity means that your brain does not filter incoming information the way most brains do. When you walk into a crowded restaurant, an average nervous system acts like a bouncer. It lets in the important information and turns away the rest. The background music stays background. The stranger's side conversation remains peripheral. The flickering of the overhead fluorescent light never fully registers. Your brain has no such bouncer. Every piece of incoming information gets full access. The music doesn't stay in the background, it sits beside you. The side conversation threads itself into your awareness. The flickering light registers. And because your brain is collecting all of this simultaneously, because it is processing depth where others are processing surface, it exhausts itself at a rate that has nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with architecture. Imagine for a moment that everyone in a crowd is looking at a painting on a wall. Most people see it. They take it in, they appreciate the broad strokes, maybe they notice the colors. But you're reading every brushstroke. You're tracing the texture of the paint. You're noticing the underpainting bleeding through in the corner. You're feeling the intention behind every deliberate mark. It's the same painting, but you are having a fundamentally different experience of it. And by the end, they are refreshed and you are spent.
This is not a disorder. This is a different operating system running at a higher resolution than the hardware was socially designed to support. But let's go deeper. Because sensory overload only explains part of what happens in crowded places. There is another layer, and this one is less about your brain's wiring and more about your history. Psychologists have a term called ambient emotional absorption. It sounds clinical, but the experience of it is anything but. It means that some people like you, don't just perceive the emotions in a room, they absorb them. Involuntarily, the way a cloth absorbs water without being asked. Walk into a space where two people are having a quiet argument on the other side of the room, and something in you already knows. Before you can articulate why, your body has registered the tension, a slight heaviness in your chest, a shift in your breathing, an indefinable wrongness that you might dismiss as your own anxiety, but which is actually, in many cases, someone else's. You are, in a very real sense, carrying emotional information that doesn't belong to you. Now, multiply that by a crowd of 300 people, each person walking in with their own grief, their own stress, their own performance of being okay, and you, without choosing to, without the ability to stop it, are downloading fragments of all of it. Your nervous system is doing the emotional labor of an entire room while also trying to have a conversation and find somewhere to stand that doesn't feel like the center of a tornado. No wonder you need days to recover. No wonder just push through it has never once actually worked. You weren't struggling to have fun, you were quietly drowning in information that no one else could even see. And here is the part that most people never reach, the part that changes everything when you finally hear it. This capacity you have, this sensitivity, this depth of perception, this involuntary emotional fluency, it did not appear randomly. It was shaped by your history, by your earliest experiences of the world, and in many cases it was shaped specifically by environments where you learned very early that you needed to pay close attention. When a child grows up in a home where moods shift without warning, where the emotional temperature of a room could change in an instant, where love sometimes felt conditional on behavior or performance or silence, that child's nervous system begins to evolve. It develops an early warning system. It learns to read the room not as a social skill, but as a survival skill. The hyper-vigilance, the constant scanning, the inability to ever fully relax in uncertain social spaces, it wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Terrible, lonely, exhausting wisdom, but wisdom nonetheless.
Your sensitivity to crowds may not simply be personality. It may be memory. A body-level memory of what it meant once to be in a space where reading every signal correctly mattered, where missing a cue had consequences, where safety lived in awareness, and awareness meant never fully resting. The crowded room doesn't scare you because you're broken. The crowded room echoes something your nervous system still remembers, a time when being surrounded by people meant needing to be very, very careful. And that is where we need to pause. Because understanding this, truly understanding it, is not the end of the story. It is exactly the middle. Because understanding something intellectually and actually healing from it are two entirely different journeys. And most people stop at the understanding. They collect the insight like a beautiful stone they found on a walk. They hold it, they examine it, they show it to people,
but they never actually put it down and let it change the way they move through the world. So let's talk about what it actually means to heal this. Not fix it, not override it, heal it. The first step is the most uncomfortable one. It is the step of grieving. Grieving the years you spent apologizing for a nervous system that was only ever trying to protect you. Grieving the versions of yourself who forced their way through loud rooms and crowded spaces and called it growth when it was actually self-abandonment. You were not weak for struggling. You were faithful to a survival system that had served you once, even if it had long overstayed its welcome. And then, slowly, without force, comes the work of teaching your nervous system something new. Not that crowds are safe, but that you are safe. That the room does not require your constant surveillance. That no signal will be missed that truly matters. That you are allowed, finally, to let some things simply pass through you without being cataloged and carried. This is not something that happens in a weekend workshop. It happens in quiet moments. In choosing, once, to sit in a busy cafe without your headphones and simply breathe through the noise without trying to process it. In noticing the overwhelm arrive, and instead of fighting it or fleeing, just placing a hand on your chest and saying silently, "I know. I feel it. We are okay." Your sensitivity is not the wound. The wound is the belief that your sensitivity makes you too much for this world. And that belief, however deeply it was carved, was never the truth. You were never too much. You were simply too aware for spaces that rewarded numbness. If this resonated somewhere quiet inside you, you are not alone in that silence. There are others sitting exactly where you are right now, tired, tender, and finally beginning to understand themselves. Stay with this channel. There is more waiting for you.